Thanks for joining us, Dr. Pryce. There's been pressure for this for some time, hasn't there? Presumably, Washington has had plenty to say as well.
Of course, what we've seen more recently is because of the concerns regarding the war in Ukraine and also the sanctions against oligarchs. The pressure has increased quite considerably. The interesting thing is that Switzerland had already tightened its anti-money laundering legislation in 2021. It was implemented in 2022, but it wasn't really going far enough. And indeed, you're quite right. I mean, there is now going to be, assuming they can get an agreement, this national register of beneficial ownership. What I found rather interesting is that lots of other countries, of course, have that. And there is also a manual which was put together by the Inter-American Development Bank on behalf of the Forum for Transparency for tax purposes. And that manual tells you more or less how to do it and what the principles are. Of course, it differs from country to country. It would differ because obviously the structure is different and the pressures also differ. But nevertheless, there is a lot of development there already, which Switzerland can just take and implement if it wanted.
I mean, it's fair to say, isn't it, that lots of European banks around the continent have been reconsidering their situation, closing bank accounts, retreating from various deals and clients. Is it fair to say that illegal money also has retreated from other cities in Europe and consolidated itself in Swiss institutions?
I think that's quite possible. Now, the interesting thing about this new legislation, if it goes through, is that, of course, the previous one put the onus, if you like, on financial institutions and intermediaries to check who the owners were. But now there is an obligation also for accountants, lawyers, other intermediaries, those who perhaps arrange purchases of real estate, to also do the checks and to be accountable for their actions. So in terms of who they're dealing with. So that's quite a tightening of the legislation if it goes through. And if that were to happen, then perhaps the trend, if indeed that was the trend, going for more money going into Switzerland, may in fact be reversed. But we have, of course, seen that quite a lot of financial institutions have been subjected to fines because of money laundering. And Switzerland is always in the news for that.
Yes, presumably there's a reputational thing at stake here, but will this actually happen? Finance Minister Karen Keller-Sutter has plenty of debate to come before this becomes law, but presumably there is a considerable kernel of enthusiasm within the Swiss government for this to go ahead now.
I think for the government, yes, but of course they have to talk to the financial sector, all the bodies representing the various institutions we've just been talking about, and also see how it actually all shapes up in the country. So yes, politics perhaps is determined to see a change, but the way that Switzerland works is through consensus. So they have to talk to civil bodies and just see how the whole thing can be implemented. It happened last time with the previous change that took place to the anti-money laundering act, which did go through a process of discussion, and it was watered down. So the question is whether this gets watered down again, but I think the pressure is such that it probably will not.
We shall see. Vicky Pryce, thanks very much indeed for joining us this evening.